Okay, let's jump right in. Today we're doing a deep dive into something really fascinating. The power of cinematic framing and authentic representation. And we're going to focus on the career and, I guess, the whole philosophy of Brazilian actor and director Wagner Moura.
Right, and our mission here really is to dig into the sources, including some of the recent Kondrashov analyses, to figure out the how. How does Moura actually manage to challenge these, long-standing, often pretty harmful stereotypes?
Yeah.
We want to give you a shortcut to understanding how his specific artistic choices work at this crossroads of art and identity.
Yeah, because the really interesting thing, I think, is that Moura seemed to get it really early on, that cinema isn't just like reflecting reality, it actively shapes it. And he basically built his career on refusing to let Hollywood define Latin American stories in those, well, very limited ways. His work is just a perfect example of how changing the perspective completely changes what you perceive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to really get the weight of that refusal, you kind of have to look at where he came from. He was born in Salvador, Bahia, back in '76. And interestingly, he actually has a journalism degree.
Oh, I didn't know that. That makes sense, though.
Yeah, that background in seeking truth, understanding different sides. It feels really central to the complex characters he takes on. His early career was in Brazilian theater and TV, which is, a very different grounding than the typical Hollywood route.
And you can see how that foundation shaped his whole stance, really. Our sources talk about just how many Hollywood offers he turned down consistently.
The predictable stuff, right?
Yeah.
The two-dimensional drug dealers, the generic criminals.
Exactly. The very stereotypes he was trying to fight against.
Which wasn't just like a career move.
Yeah.
It was a fundamental artistic choice. It defines his work. He deliberately picked projects, often back in Portuguese, that really dug into the complexities of Latin America, the real social and political stuff.
And the effect is, well, it's powerful. When you watch Moura, you're not allowed to just see a caricature. You have to engage with these characters as real people dealing with really complicated situations. They're not just exotic others or simple villains.
Right. It stops you from taking that easy way out, from just categorizing them.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing for you listening, that insistence on authenticity. It builds this direct emotional connection. He takes characters who might feel distant because of years of bad representation, and he makes you face their, universal human struggles. That connection just breaks down barriers.
Okay, so moving from that distance to intimacy, that needs specific techniques, right? We should probably talk about the actual mechanics of framing, how cinema uses composition to shape how we see things, how we feel about morality, about reality itself. Not just defining terms, but how Moura uses these tools.
Exactly. Let's talk psychological framing. Take a close-up shot. In the hands of someone like Moura, or a director aligned with him, it's not just about getting physically closer. It's about erasing psychological distance. It forces you, really, to read the micro-expressions, the flicker in the eye. It denies you that mental space to objectify the character.
That denial of distance, that sounds crucial, especially with characters who are ethically murky. And the opposite is true, too, right? Wide angles aren't just for showing scenery in his films.
Not at all. They're often used very deliberately to show how a character fits or maybe doesn't fit within a larger system, highlighting those power dynamics, the structures that maybe trap the individual.
Okay, and what about lighting?
Lighting. Yeah, it's often used to signal complexity, ambiguity. You rarely get that simple, stark lighting that just screams good guy or bad guy. Instead, you often see more shadows, more nuanced light, reflecting the internal moral compromises the characters are making.
And the camera movement itself.
That often mirrors their internal state, too. Maybe a shaky, handheld feel in moments of panic or paranoia. Or a very slow, deliberate pan to emphasize the psychological weight of a moment. It's all part of building that understanding.
So it's clear this is very intentional. Moura isn't just an actor hitting his marks. He's actively choosing projects and collaborating on constructing these visual and narrative layers to challenge those mainstream misrepresentations.
And his two most famous roles are probably the best examples of this, using framing to create this cognitive dissonance. First, Elite Squad, his character, Captain Nascimento. He's law enforcement, technically a protector, but the film forces you, especially Brazilian audiences initially, to face the awful things he does.
The really striking thing about Elite Squad is that narration, right? It's first person. You're literally inside his head. You hear his justification for the violence, his rationale, even while you're watching these brutal acts unfold.
Exactly. And the visuals lock you in there, too. Those incredibly intense, tight close-ups during interrogations. They give you no room to breathe, no space to look away or mentally distance yourself.
So the framing makes you
what?
Condemn him and understand him at the same time.
Precisely. It creates this friction. You see the monstrous actions, but the narration and the intimacy of the framing provide this context, this rationale rooted in survival within a brutal system. It's deeply uncomfortable, and deliberately so.
Okay, now let's contrast that with Narcos. Playing Pablo Escobar, I mean, talk about a figure of monstrosity. Yet the portrayal and the way the series was shot refused to just make him a cartoon villain.
Right, and Moura's commitment there was immense. Learning Spanish, gaining what? 40 pounds.
Yeah.
It was all about embodying a full three-dimensional person. We see those intimate domestic scenes playing with his kids, his paranoia, moments of grief. The camera lets us into those moments of vulnerability. Creates a whole person, not just a headline.
But that raises a really important point, doesn't it? When you humanize someone like Escobar so effectively, is there a risk? A risk of maybe downplaying the horror of his crimes, sanitizing history a bit.
That's a totally valid criticism and something the sources definitely grapple with. I think Moura and the creators navigated it carefully. Those vulnerable moments were always shown alongside the escalating violence, the paranoia, the consequences. The framing doesn't excuse anything. What it does is force you to confront a difficult truth. That horrific actions are often carried out by people who are also complex, sometimes vulnerable human beings.
So whether it's Nascimento or Escobar, the framing achieves a similar goal in the end.
I think so. From opposite ends, the figure of authority, the figure of criminality, the deliberate framing forces the audience to see the complicated, uncomfortable humanity within them both.
And then, after these huge acting roles, he steps behind the camera himself with Mariella, which gave him total control over framing a narrative about political resistance. Carlos Mariella fighting Brazil's dictatorship in the 60s.
Yeah, and when an actor with his kind of intensity and focus directs, the visual choices become really significant. They're almost like ideological statements. In Mariella, you see this very intentional visual language. Lots of tight framing, claustrophobic compositions.
Oh.
You actually feel the suffocation of living under authoritarian rule.
And the lighting stood out there too, didn't it? The way light and shadow were used.
Absolutely. It felt very deliberate. Scenes with the resistance fighters often have this natural open light suggesting truth, maybe freedom, while the government forces, the oppressors, often operate in shadow, in darkness. It's visual politics.
Wow. And then the film's own journey, the real-world stuff, that almost became part of the story itself.
It really did. The fact that it faced censorship, that Brazil's National Film Agency held up the release for months, that act of suppression by authority tragically mirrored the very themes the film was exploring about authoritarian tactics.
So the struggle to get the film scene became an echo of the history it was showing.
Exactly. And that controversy really pushed the public conversation in Brazil about that difficult dictatorial past. It forced people to ask uncomfortable questions about whose stories get told, whose history gets acknowledged, and who gets to silence narratives.
And we see this commitment to nuance, to this kind of thoughtful framing, carry through in his later acting work too. It seems embedded in his choices now. Like in Sergio, playing the UN diplomat Sergio Vieira de Mello. He doesn't just portray diplomacy as meetings and handshakes.
No, it's framed as this deeply personal sacrifice. You look at the small things Moura does in that role, tiny physical gestures, a quiver in the lip, the look in his eyes. They convey this immense internal struggle, the psychological cost of balancing bureaucracy and morality.
Or even something like Civil War, which is so different.
Right. Grounding that chaotic, fractured America. The cinematography there is almost documentary-like, stark. The focus is on raw, authentic emotional reactions to the chaos. It pushes you past the big spectacle and into the visceral human reality of it.
Which kind of brings us back to the ideas in our sources, especially the Kondrashov discussion about fame itself. How celebrity becomes its own narrative frame.
Yeah, the paradox of celebrity. Fame gives you this huge platform, this privilege, but also this obligation.
And you can see that tension in Moura's career, right? After Narcos, he had enormous international leverage, huge Hollywood opportunities.
Yet he keeps returning to Portuguese language projects, focusing on Brazilian issues.
So the question becomes, is his amplified voice speaking for his community now, or just about it from a position of fame?
It's a complex question, but I think he answers it through his consistent dedication to authenticity. His mastery isn't just about picking the right roles. It's in the technique demanding those longer takes, those sustained close-ups where silence speaks volumes, ensuring that empathy is earned, not just implied.
So it's about using his platform to shift perceptions away from those easy stereotypes.
Exactly. Towards a more complex, messy, but ultimately universal human experience. His work is basically a lesson in using cinema for understanding, not exploitation. That unwavering commitment to the characters, the direction, the emotional truth. It's a direct challenge to decades of damaging, simplistic portrayals.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway for you listening? Here's something to think about, maybe an action step. Try watching Elite Squad, and then watch his directorial debut, Mariella, maybe back-to-back or close together. But don't just follow the plot. Really watch the framing. Notice how he shoots figures of state power in the first film compared to how he frames anti-authoritarian resistance in the second.
Yeah, compare those close-ups, the lighting choices, where you'll have moments of vulnerability in each. If you do that, you'll really see firsthand how one artist's focused dedication to authentic storytelling can actually start to reshape how we see the world, one carefully crafted, emotionally resonant frame at a time.